Which team will win this year's MLB trade deadline? I talk about this and much, much more with the host of Baseball Isn't Boring, Rob Bradford, in this episode of Iggy Sports Talk. Welcome back into Iggy Sports Talk. I'm your host, Jiggy Nazuski, or Iggy for short. I want to thank you so much for tuning into this episode. But this is the most exciting part of the MLB season, at least in my opinion. I love October, watching the playoffs, the World Series, but this is the time, the MLB trade deadline, where we see some of the biggest moves throughout the season. And it really does change the trajectory of some of these teams and where they can go at the end of the season and going into the playoffs, and even at times how they'll look going into 2025 and the future. But I had the opportunity to speak with founder and host of Baseball Isn't Boring, Rob Bradford, about which teams will win the trade deadline and who will be buyers and sellers. And we also talk about much, much more regarding this exciting time in Major League Baseball. But let's get into my conversation with Rob. How are we doing today, Rob?
Oh, let's go. Let's go. I'm good. It's an honor and a privilege to be on with you. Thank you. And it's always good to hear you and see you. So, it's all as well.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know about you. I've been feeling like this season has kind of like flown by. It's kind of crazy that we're already at the All-Star break and, the trade deadline is right around the corner. It feels like, honestly, the season just started.
Yeah, the rhythms of the season, we go through the same stuff where it's the overreaction of April, and then you're settling into May, and then you start in June, you start talking about trade deadline way too early, and now you legitimately start talking about trade deadline. But it is crazy. We've had so many examples this year of how we have to be disciplined when it comes to how long a season is. I mean, I don't think there's any. There's a few different teams that have given us an example. The Yankees, I think, being at the top of the list. The Yankees is kind of crazy where, as we sit here, the Yankees are clinging. Well, not clinging. I mean, they're still number one in the wild card, but they have since I think on June 15th they had the best record in baseball, and now they're what they would be just 3 games out of not making the wild card. And I think anybody who talked in the middle of June or even early June would say, well, there are elite teams and the Yankees are an elite team. So anyway, that's my long-winded way of saying it flies by, but it also is a long season in terms of making huge rash judgments. Things can change in a hurry.
You even see it with the Mets too, across the pond over there in New York. With the grimace stuff. Oh my God! They were on quite a heater, and now they're kind of like back down to earth, right at 500. But I agree. It's tough to not make those assumptions early on in the season, even with our team, the Boston Red Sox, from what the sort of thought was before the season and where they're at now. I don't think I've ever seen, like in the past 2 years, Major League Baseball as a whole be as high as they are on Boston right now.
Yeah, well, it's weird, right? I mean, it's a very different dynamic than I think any of us has ever gone through. It just is. And if we're going to go through the evolution and the progression, which I just talked about, the Red Sox are the extreme example of that too. Because you start the year, you start with an over-under of 78.5, right? And that's with Trevor Story, that's with Lucas Giolito, that's with a healthy Tristan Casas, 78.5. You go through spring training, and the biggest story is the Netflix running around. It's like, and then you go through April, and it's a little bit better, but it was a one-trick pony because the starting pitchers were carrying them so much, and then you get to May, and people are saying, boy, Netflix are really going to have to tie themselves in the knots to make this thing interesting. But now, out of almost seemingly nowhere, not only are they good, not only are they 10 games over 500, not only are they firmly entrenched in postseason consideration, but they have established themselves as a legitimate contender, I think, because of the way that they play, the pieces that they have, pieces that we didn't think they would ever have, right? We just don't typically see an evolution of a team like this. We see teams getting hot, but we don't see an evolution of teams like we've seen with the Red Sox, I think. And I think that's a huge, huge credit to Cora and the coaching staff, because this is a hugely about these young players actually becoming better major league players.
And, you think about sort of like the feeling that was around Boston at the beginning of the year, really upset and frustrated about, the lack of moves throughout the offseason. And, now where we are today, you kind of mentioned it with the injuries. Think about if they were healthy. And, as a Sox guy, hopefully that sort of intrigues Cora a little bit more to maybe stay or extend with the team after the season. But we'll see. But at this point right now, we're seeing some teams kind of teeter-tottering on if we're going to buy or if we're going to sell during the trade deadline. And with the recent change in terms of the playoff format of, one more team being added to the playoffs for each league from going 10 teams to now 12 teams, I'm curious on if we could see more teams willing to buy and less teams may be willing to sell because they think that they have a better chance of getting into the playoffs now with those two added teams.
Yeah, I think on the surface, yes, right? I mean, the quick answer is yes, that if you're sitting there and say you're 3 games out of a wild card spot right now, you can make the case that you should buy, that you should go for it because of a couple things. Number one, we have examples of teams, the Atlanta Braves a few years ago, 2021 being the extreme of this, of teams committing and then going on a run and then getting the big payoff. And then the other part about this, which I think is the most important part, all you have to do is get in. Like this isn't like the other sports. It's not basketball, hockey, football. It's not if you get in as a 6th seed there, good luck. It's not happening. Well, we have recent example. You have a Diamondbacks team with 84 wins that went to the World Series. You have a Rangers team which sneaked in the playoffs, who won the World Series. And then you have these division winners who have been getting knocked out. We're going to see if that happens again. But because the layoff or whatever reason it is, they're getting knocked out and the wild card winners are going on. So this is what baseball is right now. So as smart people, as people who are trying to gauge about how baseball has evolved and what baseball is, well, this is what baseball is. You get in, then you have a chance, especially if you have 3 good starters. So why not? So that's my answer. I mean, you should have more buyers.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of obvious with some teams, the White Sox, the Marlins, they're probably going to try and sell off. And, I think, like I mentioned before, there's some teams teeter-tottering. And one that comes to mind is the Toronto Blue Jays. I think in a lot of people's minds, are they going to trade Bo Bichette and Vladimir Guerrero Jr.? And, it came out today that they've been telling teams that, players that are in control beyond 2024 don't even think about asking us about them. We're only thinking about trading expiring contracts, guys like Justin Turner and Kikuchi. But I'm curious from your viewpoint on if you think that they are in the standings right now, currently last in the AL East, do you think it would probably be in their best interest to try and trade those guys rather than just waiting for the winter?
I don't know. When I saw that report, I got to be honest with you, my first reaction was, okay, I get it. Because I know that you want to get the max value for these guys. But I do think that this Blue Jays team, if you bring those guys back, is still a really, really talented team. And I think you're probably going to have to turn over the coaching staff, the manager, and everything else because you're not getting the most out of what you have for whatever reason. They're probably great people and great guys and great workers, but whatever reason, you have to adjust some things. So, yes, Justin Turner, Kikuchi, fine, trade. But I think what you have to do if you're Toronto, it goes that we've seen plenty of these contracts where guys have get traded or you go in the last year, what are you going to do? I think the guys that you really want, you have to put your best foot forward in terms of contract offer. Say, we have to gauge if this is a reality, if you're going to sign here. And this is the time to do it, right? I think that's the important time. This is the time to do it, because if you get the idea or the feeling that Bo Bichette and Vlad Guerrero and these guys have just really don't want to sign, then you almost have to leverage the situation. Because when Mookie Betts was a year and a half out, so that was 2019, right? 2019. That actually would have been the time to trade him. You would have gotten more, but you really have to read the room correctly. And I don't know if Toronto's doing that. Maybe that's why they feel they feel the confident that they're going to be able to sign the guys that they want to sign, and then they'll hold on to them. And like I said, they'll be a very talented team next year.
Yeah, because that was my thought was, teams like the Mariners might overpay for Vladimir Guerrero because they need bats right now as, one of the bottom tier in terms of, just offense. But I agree with you. I think, maybe they're still trying to stay in that window, especially since they haven't really gotten to the point that probably they thought, but most people in baseball expected them to get when, Bichette and that whole sort of wave sort of came through in the last 3 or 4 years. But
well, and not to interrupt, but real quick, because I'll forget it if I don't say it. So sorry. But you bring up a good point about that window. And so the Blue Jays, think about this. The Blue Jays aren't a team that I think want to do the Orioles thing. The Blue Jays aren't a team that even want to do a 3-year thing. You know why I know this? Because they had a guy touring their facility in Dunedin this offseason named Shohei Ohtani. Like they want to be a player. They want to be a player. Like they want to be in the mix. They want to be a power. And they know if you do trade these guys and you get whatever back, that's fine. Maybe you'll be a power in 3 years, but you're not going to be a power next year. So when you said that, it just made me think of it. I'm like, let's not forget the Ohtani dynamic, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's a great point because a lot of people, kind of forget about that, especially when you look at their record right now. And, it kind of alludes to what the mindset of the overall front office sort of is, not only this past offseason, but, currently right now. And, I think, it's in their best interest to, maybe hold on to these guys, see the market, what's going on. And also, like you said, evaluate what extensions that they could try and get with some of these guys like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette. But, I think when you look at another team in the same division, the Baltimore Orioles, who are at the top of the AL East right now, but we've seen them, last year they went out and got Jack Flaherty. They added some sort of reinforcements, but I think they're a team with the abundance of the farm system that they do have. They should try and be big players in this trade deadline to really try and, not have happen like kind of what happened last year in the ALDS where they kind of just conceded and just got knocked out. I think that this is their time to really try and go for it and start a run for the next 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, and we all know how much talent they have in the minor leagues and what they're drawing from. And when they got Corbin Burns, we're saying finally, you're allocating something to win now, it was a tough trade. I mean, Joey Ortiz is a really, really good player. And so, but you got Corbin Burns. He's worked out really well for them, and he's exactly what they need. But it would seem like they need a little bit more. The good thing that they have going for them is that they have position duplication in some of these stud players in the minor leagues. Kobe Mayo, these guys you hear say, well, what's going to happen? When is this guy is going to be brought up? Well, he's being blocked or whatever it is. And so and it's a dangerous game you play with that, right? Because all it takes is one guy underperforming or one guy getting hurt. All of a sudden you don't have position duplication. But right now they do. They have that luxury, much like they had with Ortiz. Jackson Holliday sitting there, he's their second baseman of the future, is not Joey Ortiz. So that's what they have going for them. That I think that finally they showed the willingness to get uncomfortable, do the Burns trade. It shows that they're probably willing to get uncomfortable at the deadline more than a Jack Flaherty. So, yeah, I agree. I mean, and let's be honest. If you want to power rank the teams, they're there's a few teams that are in the top three, undeniably, I think right now. To me, the Orioles, I'm going to put the Phillies there too.
100%.
And the Dodgers. I don't. They have all these injuries, but the Dodgers are still the Dodgers, and it almost feels like the Dodgers are like, yeah, we'll see you in September and October. Don't worry about it.
And the Dodgers always seem to be like huge players every single trade deadline. It doesn't matter how good they are; they're always trying to get a pitcher. It seems like.
Yeah, it's the same thing, and they give up. Last year they give up some prospects. I don't think any prospects that are going to come back to kill them. They tried to get Eduardo Rodriguez. We know what happened with that. He didn't want to go there. But you're right. I mean, there are some teams where they're going to be aggressive. Well, they're in it, so that helps. That their intentions aren't going to be remotely to be selling at all. So they're going to be buyers. They know how to buy. They do it every year. But there's always a team where you're like, okay, here you go. You go for it. And I'm not talking about like the Angels last year. That was just, I don't even know what they were doing. It felt like the last gasp, and then obviously it fizzled. But yeah, I just look at these top teams, and it's going to be a great deadline because the top teams not only you have top teams, really talented teams, but look at who's running them. You mentioned the Dodgers. Look at the Phillies. You don't think Dombrowski's going to do something? We had mentioned the Orioles. Mike Elias, now we have some evidence that he's willing to go for the here and the now. So you have these teams who are I think going to be really, really aggressive. And then you have other teams that feel just good about themselves to do exactly what we said before. As long as you have good enough starting pitching, and using like the Diamondbacks and the Rangers model, and an offense can be carried by a couple guys. I mean, think about the Rangers last year, Iggy. Like it was Montgomery, Eovaldi. Who am I missing? Who was the other one? The third one. But
John Gray.
Okay, you were carried by the $280 million plus guys, Corey Seager, Simeon, these guys. Like you had star power and firepower in offense, but it wasn't like your bullpen was a lockdown. It wasn't like you were the perfect team. And it's the same thing with the Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks got there, Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly, Brendan Pfaadt, but the lesson there was what Mike Hazen said on our podcast. He's like, but I didn't do my job. We had to do it. We had to do a bullpen game in the World Series, and that's inexcusable. So through using all of those examples, these are the models which teams can look at and say, this can work. Will it work? There's no like certainties, but this can work, which I think, 5, 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't say that with as much certainty as you can now.
Right. I did remember the name that we were thinking of. I bet there's people who's listening that were like yelling at Max Scherzer, but I think we forget about him because
he's hurt. But that's not even, with all due respect to the people yelling at us right now.
Yeah.
But he was hurt. Yeah. It was Andrew Heaney. I mean, he started a game, I think. So
but he was one of those big trade pieces, and it's also thought of too. Are the Rangers maybe going to offload a Max Scherzer or something like that? But then there's also the other side of it too, where you just won the World Series. You don't want to sort of close that window. But how do you think that they're going to kind of play out this?
Well, right now, as we sit here, and by the way, they've won a few in a row. They're playing better, but they've dug themselves such a hole. And right now, as we sit here, I got to think that they, especially after you go for it the year before, that you have to sort of be realistic about this situation. And I think if they do sell, it would be really, really interesting. A guy like Eovaldi becomes fascinating because he's exactly, if I'm in a front office, I'm like, well, what's one of the most important things and having a playoff team is having a pitcher can pitch in the playoffs. Well, there you go. Even if Jordan Montgomery was healthy, which he isn't, with the Diamondbacks, and they fell out of it. All right, there you go. So I think the Rangers. I think they're going to be a really, really interesting team. But like I said, I mean, I looked at their standings today. Everyone can get excited over. I think they won 4 in a row or something, but they're still 7 back. The wild card. It's too big of a hole, I think.
Get Eovaldi back in Boston.
Yeah,
that's my campaign.
Why not, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is that let's not get this twisted about what it costs to get good players, useful players. It doesn't cost your top prospects a lot of times. Now, if you want to trade for a guy, a star player with multiple years of control, yeah, it'll cost you a star player. If you want to trade for Corbin Burns, it's going to cost you a star player. But if you want to trade for Michael Lorenzen, like the Phillies did last year, the kid he's in the futures game, his name's eluding me. He's okay. He's probably going to be a major leaguer. But is it going to kill you? No. You know what will kill you? If you don't take advantage of the window that you have to go for it to win the World Series.
Yeah, so with the Red Sox, do you think that they will be buyers or sellers? And even if they are somewhere in the middle, do you think that they could try and offload, some of these expiring contracts like Tyler O'Neill or Kenley Jansen?
So I think that right now, as we sit here, you have to be a buyer. Now, it's what's interesting to me about the Red Sox is that it's not so much about what they're buying, it's about what they're not selling. So, in other words, when you have a lot of people who are now jumping into the conversation of the Red Sox because Drake May is got 3 weeks before he goes 7 on 7s. And so they get dropped in and they're talking in surface level opinions and they're like, the Red Sox got to be buyers. All right. What do you want them to get? They don't know. I mean, they don't. They're like, well, I can tell you they need another starting pitcher who you can rely on, who can at least get you to help you get to the finish line, and also to cover yourself in case somebody falls off the cliff. And you need a right-handed bat, preferably in the middle of the infield, and someone who can field the ball at second base. So, yeah. But do you have to give up? Is it that more than getting Ian Kinsler in 2018? Maybe not. So my point is that it's not like you have to do these shock and awe moves at the deadline. The bigger conversation and the more uncomfortable one for them is that they always knew what they had in terms of trading guys that they could get stuff back for. If they were out of it, Iggy, they would be positioned as one of the best teams to sell, right?
Yeah.
What ended contract years for Kenley? Well, Chris Martin's hurt now. Tyler O'Neill, Nick Pivetta. Holy mackerel! This is legit. And I don't think you have to do what you did in 2022, which is play both sides of the fence. I think you can just say to everybody, we are keeping these guys because we think that we can win this year, and we are going to unequivocally add. We're not taking Christian Vasquez out, right? We're not taking anybody out, because once Christian Vasquez left in 2022, the perception in that clubhouse was, I don't care, you get back Eric Hosmer and Tommy Pham and Reese McGuire. The perception was they were selling. We are not selling anybody. We are actually adding people. And so, again, to me, it's going to be, that's the discipline, and that's the message you're going to have to say, that not only are we adding, but we are not selling the Kenley Jansens of the world.
In my mind, get on the phone right now with the White Sox and get Eric Fedde and Paul DeJong for, Nick York and another player.
I love it. I love a fake trade. Let's go. It's but
I think you're definitely right. I think that, this is going to be not only fun for, Red Sox fans to see what Craig Breslow's first trade deadline looks like, but also in the back of my mind through all this, I'm hoping that they really cover it during the Netflix documentary. I want to see sort of like a Moneyball type, access to, them making these types of trades.
Yeah, they will. I think they will. The access that they've given them is incredible. It is. And when you look at the Netflix stuff, it was really, as it was going for the first few months and including spring training, it was sort of like, really? What are you going to do with this? But you're always you've probably seen like Last Chance U and these.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the same group. And I said to anybody, they can be the most boring, innocuous 500 team, whatever. They're going to make people care about the characters. That's what they always do. I watched the golf one, I watched the tennis one, and all of a sudden now I'm watching a tennis match. I'm like, oh, I remember that guy from the like. That's how it works. So, but to your point, yeah, I think just go look at the dugout. Go look at the dugout. I mean, the camera is right up in like their nostrils, and they're So anyway, it'll be right now as we sit here. I think Netflix has to be really, really happy about how things are turning out.
Especially with, they were probably a little bit excited that Tristan Cassis has been out as long as he has, just to be able to get that personality on the forefront.
Oh, well, listen, he didn't have to be hurt he's like, yeah, he's the straw that stirs the drink when it comes to the whole Netflix thing. I mean, they recognize that early. He recognized it. He didn't shy away from it, which is another important part of it. So yeah, I mean, there's certain certainties in life which you don't really have to overthink. And for Netflix, that was putting a camera on Tristan Cassis all the time.
It's just natural for him. We're seeing it already with the sideline reporter work. But one of the team that I wanted to bring up to you is one that we've already mentioned in the New York Mets, who are kind of teeter-tottering on being 500 or maybe trying to see what they have in some of these players. Pete Alonso, free agent at the end of this season. There's a long list of players who are as well. And with the new CBO of David Stearns, I'm curious how you think that they're kind of go about this situation on, maybe if they'll do a mix kind of like we spoke about with the Red Sox, or, if they'll try and just blow it all up and really try and contend for 25 and 26.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if Stearns wanted to do that, if he's caught in the middle, if they take a turn for the worse here and you get a couple weeks down the road and they find themselves 4 or 5 games out or whatever it is, this is for him. That's the time to do this. I mean, it just is. Because he can build this as this is all part of the rebuilding. Yeah, we made a nice run for a little bit, but it is what it is. We don't think we can re-sign Alonso. This is all part of turning it over. And Breslow's the same way a little bit, where if you're going to ever do something like that, you have that opportunity to do it. And you have to put your imprint on that team. So with Stearns, it's interesting because you're right. Grimace and OMG and Jose Iglesias and all these guys had got rekindled interest. But as we sit here, it's still such a long way to go. I mean, not a long way to go this season. I'm talking about a long way to go to the end of the month. It's just crazy how things can turn. And the perfect example is the Chicago Cubs last year. The Chicago Cubs last year, coming out of the All-Star game, they lose 2 of the 3 to the Red Sox, and they're sitting there. And I mean, you're 2 weeks out from the deadline, and they're hanging their hat on run differential, but not a good record, and certainly not a good spot in the standings. But next thing you know, they go on a little bit of a run, and they're actual buyers at the deadline. Where if you came out of that first series out of the All-Star game, you would say never, ever, ever will Cubs be buyers. But they left the door open just enough, and then you have Heimer Candelario going to the Cubs and, a significant trade. So my point is that as much as we want to say, well, we define the buyers and sellers and everything else, it's still a long way to go.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, just to finish this off, let's put our prediction hats on real quick and sort of look ahead on who could potentially be the winner of this year's trade deadline. For me, I honestly think it's going to be Dave Dombrowski and the Phillies. I think, that they have just been that close 2 years in a row, and Dombrowski's going to do everything possible to make sure that this is their year.
I mean, I can't argue with that. It's a hard one to argue because you have the combination of of a team that honestly I thought should have won it last year. The way they were going, and they stumble in 2 games and boom, you're
Yeah.
out. You actually, all it was Kimbrel imploding for a couple games in Arizona, and then you just stumble in these 2 games in Philadelphia out of nowhere. And give credit to the Diamondbacks, obviously, but you're so close with that team. You're doing really well this year. You're on the verge. You have an owner who is basically saying whatever you need, which is important too. So, I think that absolutely. I mean, they would be at the absolute top of my list. But, I do think the Orioles are going to be interesting, not only because of what we talked about before, but because you also have a different mindset from the ownership group, David Rubenstein. And so you have that, and you have a lot of momentum, and you have a good team, and you have Corbin Burns, the contract year. You have all of this. So why not? Like, why not do it? So I think that it is very difficult for teams to make trades in this day and age of baseball. Because most of the newer GMs want to win the trades by 70%, 80% instead of 51%. And B, they look at the players the same way. So what you have to have is you have to have things like, outliers, like teams that have desperate ownership groups or willing ownership groups and willing front offices like Dave Dombrowski.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that aspect is something that not a lot of people think about is, the guys at the top, the guys who are essentially, opening up their paychecks to really fund these teams. And, I'm getting really excited about, all the trades, all the rumors with this conversation, but, really appreciate you coming on and giving your insight. And, for everybody who's listening, who's a big baseball fan, I really encourage you to check out Baseball Isn't Boring. Rob does an incredible job, with episodes, every single day, getting some of the biggest names. And, for people who want to tune into not only the podcast, but also the other great work that you guys are doing on social media, how can they access all that?
Yeah, just at BB Isn't Boring. Producer Evan does a great job. At BB Isn't Boring, like you said, every single day. It's exhausting, but it's, like you. I mean, you like talk. This is the easy part, right? But it's just at BB Isn't Boring. And if you want to buy there, you also can find the way to purchase the T-shirts, which so many people are wearing now, including NBA champions. So I appreciate you having me on. Appreciate your support. Anything I can do for you, the podcast, your cause, you're a star. So just let me know. I'm at the ready.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, Rob. I hope that you did enjoy my conversation with Rob and got a little bit of a better understanding of what we could see during this trade deadline. But I don't know about you. I'm super excited to see how everything shakes out and which players get traded where and how this really changes the whole landscape of this year's playoff format. But let me know who you think will win this year's trade deadline down in the comment section below. Like I said in the episode, I honestly think it's going to be the Philadelphia Phillies. I think that this is their year to go for it after 2 years in a row of getting so close, and especially with that energy at Citizens Bank Park. I mean, if they get 1 or 2 more players to really help them bolster up that offense and that pitching staff to go against the Los Angeles Dodgers, I mean, I think that place could be shaking during October and ultimately help them get to the World Series and hopefully, honestly, hoist up that trophy. I'm a little bit biased. I love Bryce Harper. I really want to see him win a World Series, but let me know who you think will win this year's trade deadline. But if you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening in Major League Baseball for the remainder of the season, as well as hear inspiring stories of athletes connecting mental health in sports, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure to subscribe so you get notified when new episodes drop every other week. But as always, I greatly appreciate everybody tuning in. I'll see you and talk to you next time. Peace.